Hello everyone. So in this video I'm going to show you how to use TDD to build a web application using Spring Boot. And basically we're just going to write a very simple endpoint which is going to call a service, and then the service is going to call a repository to save some data. But first of all, I want to explain what TDD is. So basically TDD is just a technique where you first write the tests and then you write the business logic. And you can start using TDD just by applying 3 steps. So first you write a red test. So then you write the implementation details to make a test pass. Finally, you refactor your code to make it cleaner. Maybe you want to apply some solid principle. Maybe you want to apply some patterns to improve your code. So let's start writing our first test. So I'm going to start with the controller. And basically, just for convenience, I'm just going to create, first of all, a package called controller. And then inside this package, we're going to have our transaction controller. And I'm not going to write any business logic yet because I want to start creating tests first. So I'm just going to create a test. And now this is the controller layer. So basically here I want to test, let's say that we want to have an endpoint where the user can send a post request with a body, and then the controller is going to call a service layer, which is going to do some business logic. But on this layer, we're just going to call the request to the controller. So we can use the web MVC test, and we can here inject the transaction controller. So we are only testing this layer, and then we can start writing our first test, which is gonna be so giving a transaction when a post request to transaction then create transaction is called, and return is created. Now I'm just gonna use BDD for the test. I usually use BDD to structure my test, and basically BDD is the behavior driven development. So basically you just write 3 blocks. On the first block, you just write what you are gonna need for running the test. So let's say you need to create an entity, an object to execute the actual business logic that you want to test. So you write it there. You also need to mock some other classes and all of that. Then there's a second block called when, and on this block you just basically execute the business logic. And finally there is a third block, which is usually called them, and on this block you want to just have some assertions or some verifications. So let's start with given, and here we are going to have our request body, which is this one here, and then we're going to have our when block, and here we're going to use the mock MVC, and we can inject it. and we can call mock MVC perform post, and the endpoint is gonna be a transaction, and the content type is gonna be a application JSON, and we can port this and then the content is gonna be the request body. Then we want to have maybe we want to print the actual request. And finally, we can have some expectations. So the status code is supposed to be is created. And we can just add a section to the signature. And now we can have our then block where we're gonna verify that transaction service with a method saved and transaction object. So we want to verify this is called. So now, well, we can run this test, but well, of course, as you can expect, this is not gonna work because, well, we're gonna have a compilation error because we don't have the transaction service, and also we don't have the transaction, and we also need to import this from Mockito. So let's start creating our transaction service. And we can mock it. Let's create a class. Service package. And now we can also create the transaction Pojo class. Now we can also create a method. All right, so let's run the test again. So what happened now? So, well, I guess, yeah, we don't have the endpoint yet. So at least now it's compiling, but now we have to create the endpoint. So we go to our transaction controller. The endpoint is transaction. And then this is a post. And it's gonna be just save. And this is gonna be in the request body. We're expecting a transaction. So this is a request body. And it's gonna be a transaction. And the response status is gonna be created. So now we run the test again. So now it's not complaining about the endpoint, but it's complaining about the transaction service because it's not called. Okay, so now calling our transaction service, we will go back to the test. Okay, so still failing because the transaction is not the same. Basically because we're passing different parameters, so we have to create the ID, just then we need the even number and amount. This is gonna be just a double for now. So we can now pass the ID. Even number and the amount. And this is a new ID. And now it's passing. Okay, so now let's go to the next layer, which is gonna be our transaction service layer. And here again we can start creating a test class. In this case we will need a Mockito because we're gonna mock the repository layer. So and we're gonna start creating our test. In this case, we're gonna have something like given transaction when save transaction, then call repository save transaction. Again, we can have our given block. In this case, well, let's go straight to the when. We need to have our transaction service. Then we can call it save. So we're going to need a transaction. We want to verify that the transaction is repository is called. but we don't have the transaction repository, so let's create it. So let's add it as a mock, and then let's create the class. And in this case, we're going to use JPA. This is an interface. I need to add JPA. So JPA repository. It's going to be transaction, and it's going to be a new ID. So if we go now to our test, it seems to be okay. So if we run it, so it's failing, of course, because the transaction repository is not really called. So let's go to our transaction service class, and let's inject the transaction repository. Now let's run the test again. And now it's passing. But we also want to improve this transaction service, because let's say well, you are saving a transaction, but there's no an account for that particular transaction. So first you need an account, and then you're gonna have transactions for a particular account. So let's introduce the account logic. So basically now we want to also verify that, well, if there's no account, we should fail. We should maybe throw an exception or something like that, saying, okay, you cannot go ahead with this operation. Let's say that we have another call to an account service. We're gonna find by ID, which is gonna be in our case maybe the IBAN. Then we're gonna return an optional of an account. So here we need an account service. We also need an IBAN and the actual the account object. So let's start. So if I run this test, it fails. So let's start creating the account service. And now we want to also create the actual this account object. And let's create the account service class. And now let's also create the account class. And let's create, so the IBAN is gonna be a string. And now we can create our method. So this is going to return an account. This is actually returning an optional. And let's return for now an empty optional. And now if we run it, so it's failing again because this mock is not actually used. So now let's add the logic to get the account. So if the account is empty, we want to run a section, right? New account not found section. It's going to be a runtime section. And now if we go to a test, now so it's expecting the transaction, it should have like the even number. So this is missing here, so we need to properly initialize the transaction, which is going to be the ID. It's going to be just a new ID, a random one. Then we can have the IBAN, and then finally just an amount. And now it's passing. Okay, so let's write another test for the actual exception. So give you a transaction that does not match with an account, then throw account not found exception. So here we can say something like assert that throw by then is instance of account not found exception, and we want to verify that the transaction is not saved. Verify. And now, well, in this case, this is going to return an optional empty. That means the account is not found, so we don't need it. And as you can see, it's also passing. So that's all. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.